Merhabalar. So these books are going to be some of my politics and history. Whenever I go to bookstores, I really can't delineate the difference between politics and history, and basically their shelves are mixed with politics and history. They're kind of the same subject to some extent, and so I've done the same thing with my books. So these are going to be some politics and history books. The Crusader Armies, I just got this the other day. I haven't read it yet, obviously, but basically it goes over the different strategies used by both sides. That should be fun. Political Modernization in Japan and Turkey. This book has a lot of good takes, and some people disagree, but I think Japan and Turkey actually are quite comparable. In fact, they both had leaders that essentially revolutionized the country and opened it up to the world. A lot of comparisons. Rootledge, Handbook of Mediterranean Politics. This is a good book if you're not familiar with what's going on in the region, but also this region has a lot of issues that aren't particularly tied to one country. They're almost like emergent issues that this book really gets to the heart of. On Grand Strategy, I haven't read this, but a lot of people said it was really good. I believe it's like a World War II history book. I could be wrong, but I'm looking forward to reading it. Contemporary Conflict Resolution. This is a terrific book. If you're interested in conflict resolution, there might be a newer edition of this, but this edition I really liked, and this is a really terrific book. In fact, I will reread that book. The Cambridge Handbook of the Just War. So basically, obviously the ethics of war, what's morally permissible in war, what's immoral in war. Kind of like a strange thing to say, but yeah, another good book. The Rise and Fall of Nations. People said this was a good book. I haven't read it yet. I believe it's going to be like Why Nations Fail, but we shall see. Making China Modern. I've talked about this book a bunch. This guy is a terrific researcher. He has another book on the criminal law in China, historically speaking. I want it. But this book is terrific. I think it's probably one of the best books written on China, and I strongly recommend reading it. Henry Kissinger, World Order. I have not read this yet, but Henry Kissinger is quite the controversial figure in politics, and so I'm curious what he has to say. I'm not so sure I'm going to agree with him, but we shall see. Thomas Friedman, The Lexus and the Olive Tree. So this, I watched his Oxford Union debates, and then I proceeded to buy all of his books. I believe he was a journalist. I think he was a journalist in Israel. I could be wrong. He has another book you're going to see here on like Beirut in Israel. But yeah, he's basically like a journalist for Middle Eastern politics. I thought he was actually pretty intelligent, and he has some pretty reasonable takes on things. That's why I got his books. I haven't read that one though. Before and Beyond Divergence, The Politics of Economic Change in China and Europe. I believe this just compares China and Europe. Let's see. I haven't read it yet, because I'm going to go over like European history and Chinese history, so I'm collecting books for that. And when I say history, I mean modern history. Yeah, it just compares China and Europe politics-wise. Okay, Noam Chomsky, Gazan Crisis. This is a very highly regarded take on the issue of Israel and Palestine. If you want to know about the issue, I suggest reading this book. You might not agree with everything in it, but at least read it. Thomas Friedman, again, Beirut to Jerusalem. He just goes over the issues in the Middle East. Again, I think he gives some very centrist takes. He's not too biased on either side. I think he's quite reasonable. The Balfour Declaration, Empire, Mandate, and Resistance in Palestine. So this is obviously the history of the Balfour Declaration, and nothing other than just the Balfour Declaration. So again, I think this is another good read if you want to get informed on the issue. Rootledge Handbook of Modern Israel. If you want to know about Israel in general, In fact, if you want to know about any issue in general, usually the Rootledge handbooks are pretty good for this. Same with the Oxford handbooks or the Cambridge handbooks. This one goes over all the central issues in this realm. You can go and look at it. Like I believe it goes over politics, like the parties, the history of the parties, conflicts, both within the country and outside of the country. External relations, Israel and the Middle East, our political society, economy and society, life in the city. Yeah, it's like a general overview of Israel. The Iron Wall. This is another guy who I watched his debate at the Oxford Union, and then I decided to go and buy his books. He has a very, very well-informed take that isn't very biased, which is a problem with most books on this issue. And I strongly recommend reading this as well. This is a very, very good book. Enemies and Neighbors by Ian Black. I watched his debate on the Oxford Union as well, and I bought his book. I haven't read this one yet, but I'm super excited to read it because he was pretty intelligent in his debate. I liked the way he spoke, and he seemed to be well informed on the opinion, or on the matter. The Rootledge Handbook of German Politics and Culture. So I have a bunch of books on Germany. I haven't read them all yet. The reason why I have them is because when I learn a language, I like to get informed about the country whose language I'm learning. And that's why I have this. I also have a lens ball, and that's a lens ball. Manufacture and Consent by Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman. This is basically just about how media can make you like agree to an opinion that you wouldn't have otherwise agreed to. And it's Manufacture and Consent. It's a good book, but a bit basic. This book I wish I didn't read. It's about like how neoliberalism is like fragile and how there's a whole bunch of things that need to be considered when you're looking at economics, like let's say like a climate disaster can shape how an economic policy is carried out, and therefore it can make that economic system look bad. Stuff like this, right? But that being said, the author is like one of these people who needs to use overly abstract terms, puts things in convoluted ways. It's almost like it's a testament to their intelligence that they wrote this book, rather than conveying the actual ideas. On top of that, I think some of his takes on neoliberalism is pretty poor, and in my opinion is politically biased. But that being said, I haven't read this yet. It's basically some of the ideas of Gandhi's. Goes over those, talks about different ideas of them. I believe it was for a course that I was taking, but I haven't read this yet. I've talked about this book before with other people. It's a terrific book. There's a new edition. Like I said, I'm going to read not the 4th edition, but the edition after that, because the book is so systematic. It covers all the issues. If you want to learn something about the Middle East, read this book. It's such a terrific book. I enjoyed reading it. Yeah, I strongly recommend reading this book. Jared Diamond, The World Until Yesterday. I have not read this book yet, but I am going to read every Jared Diamond book. Not because I'm like obsessed with Jared Diamond, but I think he's worth reading. Like he has well researched books. For that reason, I'm going to read all his books. North America, an introduction. So this is basically just political issues in Canada. That's all this really is. Just like just an introduction to political issues in Canada. And who cares about Canadian politics, to be honest. Berlin, the downfall. I actually just saw this in a bookstore, and I was like, okay, I'll grab it. Because again, as I said, I'm collecting books on Germany because I want to learn the German language. And so he has a bunch of them, I don't know if it's his, but there are a bunch of them back here. You can see them. Just different parts of World War II, I believe. A Treatise of Government, a letter concerning toleration. Yeah, a letter concerning toleration. 2 Treatises of Government. John Locke, obviously. If you haven't read Locke, then I strongly suggest you go and read Locke. He writes pretty well, and some of his ideas are pretty, I don't want to say reasonable, but like, well-founded or like well-formed. You can tell like they were ideas that were thought out by a pretty clever cookie. The History of Europe in Bite-Sized Chunks. This is like a good reference book. So if you want to like learn about some particular stage of European history, which I want to get to European history, I haven't gotten to it. You could just read one of these little chapters and then there you go, like a good little source. Plato and the Republic. There's not much to say about this book that hasn't already been said. Therefore, Plato and the Republic. The Canadian North. This is political issues, I think, specifically in Canada, but more specifically in the North. There are like climate issues and issues with Indigenous people, I believe. That's all this is. The Rights of Man by Thomas Paine. Worth reading. I don't know if you're going to agree with everything that Thomas Paine says, but worth reading. Christopher Hitchens, The Trial of Henry Kissinger. So as we know, Kissinger was a U.S. foreign policy guy, and Hitchens believes that he's committed things like war crimes and actually should be tried as a war criminal. So I don't know if I'm going to agree with that, but I want to see what Hitchens has to say about it, because he's a pretty smart guy too. The Ripple Effect, The Fate of Freshwater in the 21st Century. I just got this because I wanted to see what was going on here. I thought that was a pretty important topic, and I don't actually hear it talked about much. And so, yeah, like, what is the future of water in human societies? That's actually an interesting question. In fact, it's an interesting question for almost any of the natural resources. That's why I got this book. The Cold War. This is just a book I saw in a bookstore, and yeah, like I'm basically the kind of person, I walk into a bookstore, I'm gonna buy a book if it's there, and so I bought that book. Guns, Germs, and Steel. This book is a good book, not because I agree with everything in it, but because it's one of the rare books that argues for environmental determinism, which you don't see a lot. So that's, if you want to get into that, this is a good book for that. So those are politics and history books, and with that being said, tschüss.